It's more conversation and more me, Adrienne Lawrence. And this time I am joined by a correspondent for Insider. That's Julia Black. Thanks for joining us, Julia.
Thanks so much for having me, Adrienne.
All right, now, so this is a wild story. And I remember when I saw it slow roll down Twitter, I was just amazed. But essentially, I know you put out a piece for Insider that focuses on this whole effort from tech bros to populate the world. What is this?
That's right. This is a quiet but growing movement that's kind of taking off in these tech and VC circles, based on the idea that the human population is on the decline, and especially birth rates among certain groups. And it's their job to fix that by having lots and lots of children.
Oh, wow. That's great, because that's definitely what we need in a society that is kind of overpopulated, especially on Earth. But I'm guessing they don't care that the Earth is already inundated with people. They want certain people here. Is that right?
Exactly. That's pretty fundamental to this argument. It's kind of the quiet part that no one really wants to say out loud. You see Elon Musk, for example, tweet a lot about population collapse, and obviously demographers push back on that and say, actually, the global population is growing. But I think it's kind of important to look at certain groups that aren't having kids rather than the global population as a whole. And that's what they're really worried about.
Yeah, they're worried about, it really seems that these like tech bro, they want people of a certain maybe IQ or intelligence level, even though I think we've definitely seen over the last few days that Elon Musk's IQ is not at genius level. But I'm guessing it's white people and they want more of them. And so that's kind of the underlying eugenics type of argument that's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, based on the very simple definition of eugenics, which is manipulating the gene pool to promote superior characteristics, and I put that in quotation marks, that is their belief. That's what this is. And in fact, some of the people involved in these movements don't even deny that. They'll freely use the word eugenics. So that is what is more or less going on here. It is that concern about the high IQ. A lot of these people really fundamentally believe that wealth is a direct reflection of IQ, and that this is a genetic factor. And so therefore one that you can pass on to your kids. Obviously, the science around that, highly disputed, the whole nature versus nurture argument that we've always heard. So yeah, there's a lot of faulty science at work here, but that does not mean that these people don't really fundamentally believe that this is an important issue.
It's so interesting to me because the thought of accumulating wealth, it's largely a resource. So it's whoever is resource hoarding. And as we've seen over the history of Earth and whatnot, it's generally been people who are most violent and most deceitful and most cruel and terrible who have been the ones to obtain all of the resources because they did it by way of illegitimate means. And so the thought that you can pass that down to your children is really what it almost suggests they're trying to pass down, since it's not necessarily intelligence that would correlate to actual wealth. But then again, that's just my thought, perhaps. But is that something that anybody is considering?
It's difficult because on one hand, it's very inherent to this movement to be secretive. So like I said, there's a lot of parts that they're kind of not willing to say out loud. And so I hope that through my work, I can kind of help them say the quiet parts out loud. But then again, there are some of them who call themselves ruthless pragmatists. It's kind of these people who, they don't care if they offend anyone. They don't care if some people get hurt in the process. They've even said things like, if certain parts of the population have to get wiped out, like, so be it. These are the kinds of people who will speak very openly and say very uncomfortable things. So I do think that ruthlessness is a part of this.
Considerably unfortunate in large part because I think that these people who are engaged in this behavior or are following this mindset are failing to appreciate various variables. But hey, that's just my thought. But I also kind of wanted to ask about the larger framework of this and its movement. Has it been receptive in other countries? Is this something that is going on globally, or is this largely Silicon Valley individuals who definitely weren't popular in high school kind of getting their payback?
Just pronatalism as an idea is not a new idea. It's actually something quite a lot of governments around the world have engaged in. There are pronatalist policies in countries around the world, especially in Europe. And again, as you say, there is some overlap between white populations. Also, Asian populations, I will say, countries like Japan, Korea, quite concerned right now about their birth rates. So it's not unique to the United States. I would say this particular brand of it is very Silicon Valley-esque. It's actually taking off a lot in Austin. Anyone familiar with the tech world might put two and two together and realize that Elon Musk has a very large presence in Austin. This is very popular in his circles from sources I've been speaking to. So, this is a particular Silicon Valley brand of pronatalism, but pronatalism is not a new idea.
Yeah. And so this offering PGTP, what is that?
So PGTP is a new realm of genetic testing that has been quite controversial. Basically, for a long time, we've been testing for things like Down syndrome, very simple genetic disorders that are easy to identify. That's become quite custom in the IVF process, for example. What's newer is these polygenic traits, which start to get a lot more complicated. And, a lot of scientists argue that the science just isn't there. This is stuff like intelligence. The companies that some of these couples are using to test their embryos they claim that they can test for things like brain fog, headaches, ADHD, like these things that are actually quite complicated genetically for however much they are even influenced genetically as opposed to by your environment. So these tests are unregulated, nonetheless hitting the market, and a lot of parents are starting to use them, but highly disputed how much they work at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And also too, some of the things that people think are adverse or bad, I actually think are extremely helpful to our society. For example, like things like ADHD, which I happen to have, and my ability to hyperfocus on many things and to keep a lot of information in my head and to access it in a certain way. You would want a diverse population so you can have different skill sets in order to thrive. And especially with an individual like Elon Musk on board for this, who is identified as having Asperger's, which is now on the autism spectrum, you would think that there would be some uplifting in that diversity, especially if he wants to categorize himself as some kind of genius, eh?
I will say on their behalf that they do speak about protecting some of these genetically diverse traits. Autism is actually one that they speak quite a bit about. So it gets kind of complicated, but yes, certainly the designer baby question leaves a lot to wonder about, what do we start eliminating? What happens when you start eliminating brown eyes or dark skin? I mean, this could go in a lot of very dangerous directions.
Seriously. And I, as somebody who registers on the spectrum as well, I completely appreciate it. We tend to often think we are superior in intellectual capacity because of the way in which our minds work. So to preserve that, I totally get it. It makes sense as opposed to uplifting neurotypical mindsets. And so I'm not necessarily going to fight her on that. But I still think it's wrong in terms of eliminating true diversity, the things that add color and dynamic to our society and give us different opinions, different people, and essentially compel us to be greater people and embracing humanity in its various forms. But to each his own if they choose to breed in this manner. And I guess what would be something in your story that, and in your research, I would say, that you think was maybe the most shocking aspect of all of this new movement and mindset?
Gosh, there's a lot to choose from. But again, I will go back to that kind of openness that these people use to speak about some plans that might strike some as quite nefarious. The couple I interviewed in my piece actually have been naming their children after Roman emperors, basically with the idea that these are the children who can lead the human race into a bright future. So certain fascist undertones definitely can be somewhat troubling.
No, absolutely. Quite scary in that regard. But I guess these people have every right to breed and multiply as they wish. And so we can't necessarily get in the way. And it sounds like public shaming will not necessarily do the trick in terms of getting them to stop advancing these ideologies. So hopefully it's not something that fully takes off. But unfortunately, given how we are shifting too much, it seems, toward fascism, and also there seems to be so many underlining mindsets and the thought that there are certain people who are inferior in our society, it is scary if this takes off on a larger level. But I guess what's next for you in terms of your research and work in this area?
This all started with a tip about Elon Musk's twins. And whenever I publish a story about this, I get more tips. And so I'm following some new leads. And my new sources are suggesting that this does in fact go a lot deeper than the public realizes.
Wow, yes. And so those twins you're talking about are the ones he had with a colleague. And do you know, did they use IVF, or is this just him deciding to, plant his seeds where he wishes?
I believe it was Reuters that reported that they did in fact use IVF, which again would suggest that this is less of a love child situation, more of a project.
Exactly. And God, those children, God bless them to figure out or to find out that they are literally just in a science experiment to advance eugenics. Oh, it's a very unfortunate and upsetting thing, but I hope they are loved no matter what, and regardless of whether their IQs are off the chart or not. But I want to thank you so much for joining us, Julia, and also for continuing this work, because learning about these little underground nonsense factories is so incredibly important to our society. And so if there are those out there who want to follow your work or find you, where can they go?
I'm on Twitter for the time being at MJNBlack. That's M like Maria.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's Julia Black, a correspondent from Insider.